we were designing these residential apartment spaces, which used to be 800 square feet as a two-bedroom.
Especially on a holiday when you stay at a resort, the most exciting part a lot of times is the resort that you're staying in.
Historically in India, like you see these beautiful artisans. This is a Tanjavur Pandit, an Agama Pandit, and he's doing it without looking, there's no marking. It's just by andaz.
There's also the element, I think, in today's time of silence, of having transitional spaces between the spaces.
Luxury is something that is so diverse. It exists, I think, physically in terms of tangible things. It exists metaphorically.
We have with us Mr. Yatin Patel from DSP Design Associates, Laura B. Robin from Studio HBA, Sravanya Piitie from Soka Design Studio, Ekta Parekh from Red Architects, and Husna Rahaman from Fulcrum Studio.
So today we're going to discuss about exploring luxury living spaces. So, in the Indian context, luxury is perceived in different ways, both from an experiential aspect and, while we design different spaces for luxury in the residential segment, it's been transformed over time. Now, we've had customers over time tell us that, we were designing these residential apartment spaces, which used to be 800 square feet as a two-bedroom. It came down to even lesser than that. And now we're seeing a whole shift into redefining what residential spaces are. And so I had this one client who we came across and said, there's this one hotel, which is a very successful hotel, a five-star hotel, which they want to demolish. And I just asked the question, why would you want to demolish a successful hotel that's been running for the last 3 decades? You might as well just upgrade that. He says, no, I want to do extremely luxurious residential building. Each of those apartments are a minimum of 7,500 square feet and going upward to 11,000 to 22,000 square feet. So we're seeing that kind of a shift in the aspirations in the Indian context on what spatial luxury is, which we want to discuss today, and the experiences of what we have in terms of those luxury spaces. The other example I'd like to also give is we started this one villa, and the client said, let's restrict ourselves to a 10,000 square feet villa on a 3-acre piece of property. By the time we started, we were already up to about 20,000 square feet. And then when we hit site, we drew everything up, we marked everything up on site. And the client says, Yatin, this space is looking a little small. Can we just increase it? And we just kept expanding and expanding. Ultimately, the 10,000 square feet villa that we started off with eventually became close to about 35,000 square feet. And it's just a luxurious experience there. They wanted the feel of a resort, which is what they got. So from an experiential perspective, they wanted a resort kind of a feel. So that's the shift that people are seeing from, setting about how they're going to start living their lifestyles. And so today we've curated the whole discussion and dialogue around luxury of space, and how it is perceived in our Indian market and Indian segment. So today I'd like to welcome a dynamic set of people on stage who are stalwarts in their own field. So I'd like to welcome the 4 beautiful ladies on stage. So like I mentioned, we'll be discussing about luxury of spaces, and I'm going to ask a few questions to the ladies. Laura, I'll go with you first. And if you can, at Studio HBA, you come with a lot of experience and exposure to luxurious spaces and from the hospitality background across different geographies of the world. So if you can give us some of your insights on how spaces have been performing and how you see the shift from hospitality into the residential segment, and your insight on how globally that's making the shift into the Indian context.
That's a good question. Usually you think of the design approach to designing a hospitality project and a residence very different, because with a hotel you're almost designing for a hypothetical person, and it needs to, in many ways, cast the widest net possible, so it appeals to the target audience of that brand, where a residence is highly personal. But in a way, they're also not very different, because if you think about when you go on a holiday or you stay in a hotel, you almost revel, especially on a holiday when you stay at a resort. The most exciting part a lot of times is the resort that you're staying in. And the reason why it's so appealing is because you revel in the dopamine rush of slowing down a bit and enjoying every experience that you have. And whether that's having your coffee outside in the morning on a veranda, or having this barefoot luxury experience, that's what is giving you this euphoria when you go on a trip. And what I find is that the way to design a residence is to also bring that into someone's home, create a sanctuary, and celebrate the everyday. And you can do that in so many ways. And I think the trend is to attempt to slow down in your own home, and it's personal, and revealing something that becomes very highly personal in a beautiful and curated way. If you see this image, this is an interior design, the interiors of a very famous basketball player. And this is a gallery wall of a lot of the games that he played. So you can reveal highly personal parts of someone's personality and display them in a way that's very curated, like you would in a hotel, and elevate it to a work of art. Thank you.
And Sravanya, I've seen that you've been traveling a lot to different places across India, and I know that you've been exploring different arts and different culture and introducing that into some of your work. So if you can just tell us how you've been, kind of guiding your trips in translating that into design and getting the luxury content into your design work.
Thank you, Yatin, and thank you, FOAID, for having me. So I think that historically in India, like you see these beautiful artisans. This is a Tanjavur Pandit, an Agama Pandit, and he's doing it without there's no marking. It's just by andaz, right? So to do this kind of craftsmanship in India, we are so abundant with it. And as I've traveled around, I've seen that these artisans, their craft is languishing. It should be flourishing. And we have such unique artisans in different corners. And when we went to the Milan Fair, Vincenzo De Cortis, one of the masters, we met there. And he looks at places of faith, universally, churches, mosques, temples, had some of the best artisans. So even in Italy, you go to the churches, the best stone, the stained glass. So what Vincenzo's done is he's taken different elements, onyx, marbles, glass, crystal, metal, and made it into a beautiful vase. And you see this lady, she does amazing palm leaf basketry. This man, he makes tiles. So, the Atangudi tiles, which were inspired from Europe, he actually makes them by hand. And, he personalizes it to whatever design you want. Simple man, 20 rupees a tile. But I think bringing Indian artisan and that story with a multitude of our Indian materials. Like why laterite rock, which is made, all our forts are so many of them made of laterite rock because with moisture it fortifies. So to use products and materiality and artisans of our country, and when you travel around this magical country, you see that, and to bring that story to the table, I think that's what I want luxury to be.
Great. And Ekta, if you can give us an architect's perspective of how designing spaces to perform for luxury, right from the nuances and influences and considerations that you would do for when you're designing for your clients, and somebody comes and says, I want luxury, and which normally is the case, right, in your practice.
So I think, Yatin, this is a great topic, first of all, because luxury is something that is so diverse. It exists, I think, physically in terms of tangible things. It exists metaphorically. Luxury can be defined in so many ways. It's from the want of the most basic things, right? It's like from the want of the next cool bag or the next cool watch. Or in terms of spaces of that extra 100 square foot in your wardrobe, or an extra space to perform hobbies, like whether it be an art studio or somewhere a child can drum, drums. I think for us as a practice, and we're a small studio, but it's a diverse practice, and it has the luxury, and I use that word specifically because it has the luxury of choice of doing things from design all the way up to product design. And I think that is the biggest high for us, because it's having the luxury of choice to choose between scale. And having that choice of scale, it lets you not be bored in your current scenario, and also wear multiple hats, because you are then truly a designer. And then that mental ethos translates into objects that you do, whether it, and scale differs. So speaking specifically from my context of change of scale, I think there's some some interesting stories along the way of when clients come to us saying we did a home which finished a year and a half ago in Delhi. And coming from Bombay, our homes and spaces are much, much smaller and tighter. Of course, they are getting larger and more luxurious. But this was a home for about 28,000 square feet. 4 people lived in it. And their worry was that we're not going to have enough space. And for somebody who comes from Bombay, saying that we typically design homes which are between 2,000 to maybe 10,000 square feet at the most in apartments, this was a ridiculous want. But I think it's about interpreting that brief. It's about listening to that individual and saying, okay, what do you need? And just understanding family dynamics. The husband used to wake up late, go to work late, and therefore come back late, watch TV, mostly in bed, news, and the wife would be really bothered by it. She would be annoyed that I wake up early, I do yoga, I'm up at 5. Why can't we have a room which kind of multiplies? And I think there's some images of it in here, which becomes a space where he's watching TV in the space, I can have a door which closes off, and I can be in my bedroom. And I think the luxury that came about from that dialogue was the fact that they had an entire floor to themselves, and we could actually design 2 master suites. And you had these sliding, almost moving walls, which became dividers between their space, which allowed them to coexist, but also have space between them, to not get on each other's nerves. And I think that is a pure definition of luxury, to be able to interpret what you want and make something out of it.
Husna, your perspective on luxury and the way you deal with it in your practice in terms of be it the role of art, materiality, the way you sculpt the volumes that you perceive in the homes that you've been creating.
I think luxury for us starts at the drawing board. I think the clarity of intent that you bring to a project right in the beginning, and the ability to refine that idea along the way to ensure that what you have is a distillation and a removal of excess and that purity. And that strength of the idea, I think, is something that clients are deeply involved with, because they realize that there's much more to design than the obvious. What you see and what you touch are aspects, but there's a deeply philosophical idea of what luxury is. And I think that's rooted in ideas of surprise, showing somebody their lifestyle interpreted in a language that they could not predict. That element of seeing exactly what they expected in their minds in terms of just the functionality, but stylistically and spatially creating a resonance for it that surprises even yourself each time, pushing the envelope from the within. There's also the element, I think, in today's time of silence, of having transitional spaces between the spaces. Oh, yeah, they're rooms. They've got to be rooms of different sizes and variations to perform the various functions. But how do you feel when you're moving from one space to the other? How do you feel when you're moving from within to without? Ascending that staircase, moving between your bed and bath space. So there are those moments, saturated moments of eloquence, of pause, that I think is the luxury that we don't see as starkly as we do the materiality and the product. And I think therein lies the magic. That transcendence in our mind spiritually, to realize that true luxury is actually an aspect of a mindset that is projected into a drawing and everything else revolves around it. That is the protagonist, the absolute center stage. So the silence, the surprise, the serenity. The Japanese have a very interesting concept called ma. And it's extremely opposed to the Western idea of being, because they believe that it's the void around the edges of space. It's the pause between the notes of music, not the music itself, but the pauses between the notes. It's what's not said in a conversation rather than what is. And the gravity of those moments that are, when translated into a space and a person, I think gives it the beauty, which I think is a far more important word than even luxury, because luxury is subjective, like Ekta said, but beauty is a constant need of the human psyche. It's something that's primeval. The art and the beauty that we seek is essential to our souls.
So can I say that the experiential value of this space is what you would define as luxury?
Yes. The emotion, the feeling, the levitation. If you can be in a space and feel heightened magic, much more than you did a minute before, and you don't have to define or quantify it, you're just feeling just so good within. That for me is a luxury that I think supersedes every other kind.
Great. That's great. Super to hear. Laura, you've also traveled a lot in India. And how have you, in your practice, brought about the Indianness into your projects? So again, in India, we celebrate a lot of art and culture, which Sravanya has also been taking cues of and using that in some of her projects. I'm sure you may have some experience, if you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, thanks. Can y'all hear? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to address the luxury topic in a roundabout way through craft. And I've been in India. I've made India my home. I've been in India, working in India for a decade now. And it's been really fascinating to see how the country has changed. And it's been quite rapid. If a decade is nothing, it goes in the blink of an eye. And I'm sure y'all will agree because you've designed residences as well. But designing residences about 10 years ago, maybe even as far back as 3 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe it shifted drastically after COVID. We were all spending a lot more time at home. But it was very stark when I first got to India, where people valued design that was, or wanted to approach design through the lens of how other people were going to perceive their homes. And it was weird, is because I specialize in hospitality, and taking that approach in a hotel is natural, but when a residence is very unnatural. And how do you design something that's so personal that someone's going to use every day and view it through a lens of a hypothetical? It's very difficult. And I am so thankful that that is changing and has changed, and now it's very rare that you come across a project like that. And people demand something highly personal, honest, and they almost expect for you to transform, like you were saying, transform a very abstract list of wants and needs into something unexpected. And I like to ask lots of random questions that have seemingly to a client has nothing to do with design. Well, what do you collect? What are you interested in? What do you like to do in your free time? What side of the bed do you sleep on? What's the mixture of your wardrobe? Do you like shoes? Do you like bags? Do you like clothes? Are you more of a minimalist? Do you have any glassware that are family heirloom? I ask them all kinds of questions that don't make sense at the time, but after you start to really get to know someone and all of these intricacies of their lives, that's when you can start to select things and curate things and reveal them in a way that elevates it to art. And it's personal, and it's not pretentious, it's not precious, but it's precious to them, and that's what's important. And that's what's so exciting about designing a residence currently, and I'm so glad that it's shifting. And to address your question, this is also an important part of it. Most people now want something that's handmade, handcrafted, rooted in their culture. And I find that more and more the value today is something that's handmade, because everything is imported from China. Everything is sold on Amazon. Everyone goes to IKEA to get things. Before, we didn't have IKEA. So IKEA was precious because we couldn't get our hands on it. And now everyone has it, and there's a very uniform design aesthetic because of Pinterest and everything else. And real luxury is having something else that someone else doesn't have, and feeling like you're holding something that's precious and independent. And so I find that there's a shift towards Indian craftsmen having things handmade, having things that's one of a kind. Everyone can go to Armani and buy a suit or a suit off of the rack, a designer suit, but not everyone can have something made custom for them. And that is what is precious, because time is finite. Like, things that are handmade are finite. It's almost antiquated, and that's what I'm finding. And it's very, very inspiring. I'm glad that it's moving in this direction. Thank you.
Yeah, but you've been traveling across the country, and you've been picking up. I know that you've been picking up some crafts,
Right.
and introducing that into your designs. And I've seen some of your presentations, and I've seen you've got doorknobs that you've crafted into. You've taken the inspiration and got them into making bespoke doorknobs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to.
Yeah, sometimes we obviously we don't want to Disneyfy anything. We see lots of motifs all over the place that we've seen a million times. And there are two things. There's the actual object that's sourced from a craftsman, and then there's taking something that we all know and love and that's pervasive in the culture and translating it into a new language and a new medium in a contemporary way. And so that feels unequivocally Indian, but it doesn't make it a caricature. So there's that, and then there's also working with craftsmen and doing something that's socially responsible, creating value and beauty and bringing it into context that it wouldn't otherwise have a platform. And so those are objects, and a lot of times we design, and this is in a hotel that we're doing, we are designing the door pulls out of Dokra, or we're taking, a lot of times you get amazing textiles and you can go and work with the craftsmen and study the motifs and translate them into a new language. So we do that as much as we can, and it's far more responsible, and it doesn't really come at a very different cost. So, and it looks far more beautiful than things that you see everywhere.
Sure, and that's more bespoke,
Right.
right? Rather than, like you said, ordering a piece of furniture from Armani or some brand. Ekta, you in your practice, again, I know that you do a lot of research in materials and explore a lot of different types of materials and their applications thereof. How do you kind of try and explore some of that into and translate that into some of your projects, maybe in terms of the luxury quotient, or again, coming from not just picking up a brand and translating that, or just, procuring a piece of furniture? And I know that you do a lot of stuff on that.
So I think it's a lot of what Laura said. It's like, I think just awareness of design has reached a point now where everybody is aware of brands that are out there. And yes, like while there's a lot of affordability to be able to get a lot of those brands, the uniqueness of having something handcrafted is something that cannot be matched. We have a lot of great Indian design. I mean, some of the stuff that you've been showing is beautiful. And I think just educating the client as to awareness of what's available locally and the fact that you can tweak that, make it your own, make it customized, it will be one of a kind, makes it all the more appealing. So sometimes it's, I think we've been, and Amit's not going to like this if he's here somewhere, but we've been tired of using Italian marble for a while. And it's now, he's gone a long way from there and to reintroduce terrazzo in the field. But that's what it is. That's what it is. It's about going back to your roots. It's about trying out materials like we had mud floors and walls in village homes for the longest time. And now we're doing similar kind of poured floors. Yes, there is a difference in terms of a little bit chemical composition to overcome shrinkage cracks and things like that. So you will put a little bit of cement mortar in it. There'll be some amount of epoxy-based materials to allow for that. But it's basically using that technology, but with information that we've had from our history to combine the two. And we find that very exciting because it's almost like work then becomes an experimental lab. And that's kind of what we're known for. Red is about research and inquiry. And that's what makes it exciting, because beyond a point, where do you take design? Like, where do you take it to the next step? We're recently trying to do, Rammed Earth has been around for a while. We've never successfully built a project out of it. So for us, it's a learning. We're doing a home in Kathmandu with it. So there's a lot of earthquake, stability issues that we're dealing with. But for the client as well, it's exciting because it's an old technique which is being repurposed and used in a modern home. And I think it keeps it fun.
Why can't we use an ancient Indian materiality which actually alkalizes your food?
We actually, in our office, poured our first epoxy floor there. And we had a ghastly experience. It was nothing short of a nightmare. And if I had done that for a client, I would have definitely lost that job.
The specificity of our country is staggering.
You can put all the marble, all the gold leaf, everything luxurious in it that you want, but at the end of the day, people are still going to buy the apartment in Paris.
The individual perceives as luxury, as what he feels as his own space, or what he really wants or desires, and the experiential level of that.